Hello, traveler. Look, if you grew up alongside a narcissistic father, nothing, absolutely nothing, that you suffered was being too sensitive. It wasn't being dramatic. It wasn't an overreaction. Daughters of narcissistic fathers carry invisible wounds, deep wounds that span decades. Wounds that shape how you love, how you trust, and how you see yourself, how you understand your own worth in the world. And that brings us to today's lesson. We're going to talk carefully, with scientific foundation, and with great care, about these silent scars. Because understanding what happened is the first step toward breaking a cycle that should never have started in the first place. So come with me. When we talk about parental narcissism, there is a clear pattern in the research and literature. There are many studies, many books about narcissistic mothers, but there is an enormous silence about narcissistic fathers. And this absence doesn't happen by accident. Throughout history, we've assumed that the mother is the primary caregiver, and therefore, the main source of attachment trauma. But this completely ignores the father's influence on emotional formation and the construction of a daughter's self-esteem. So, in recent decades, the mental health field has begun to recognize that the paternal figure is just as determinant as the maternal one in shaping expectations of safety, of personal value, and informing relationship models. Because the real truth is that narcissistic fathers operate in a highly destructive way. They're critical, they're unpredictable, they're emotionally unavailable, and they're profoundly self-centered, seeing their daughters as extensions of themselves rather than as separate human beings. And here is something crucial. One of the deepest wounds left by a narcissistic father isn't only in childhood, it is also in adult life. It is in romantic love that the impact appears with the most force, with the most devastating clarity. Because narcissistic fathers teach their daughters from an early age that men are figures to be appeased, to be praised, to be feared, and to be constantly pleased. And this is where one of the most common trauma responses emerges. Exactly this pattern of flattery and submission. The daughter learns to dissolve herself to survive. She becomes hyper-focused on his mood, constantly trying to read his emotional temperature. She tries to avoid criticism at all costs. She tries to be perfect, flawless, invisible in her needs but visible in her compliance. The result, in adult life, this pattern becomes an emotional template, a blueprint for all future relationships. The daughter feels attraction to distant or aggressive men because this feels familiar. It feels like home, even though home was painful. So relationships with gentle, stable, welcoming men feel strange. These men seem weak, even undesirable or unappealing. The brain has associated love with tension, with instability, with walking on eggshells constantly. You see? And it doesn't stop there. Narcissistic fathers usually present another striking characteristic. They govern through fear. Sometimes it is explicit fear, with explosions of rage, with shouting, with threats that hang in the air. But in many families, what destroys most is indirect fear. It is the punishing silence, the withdrawal of affection, the use of money as a weapon of emotional manipulation. So the daughter grows up in a state of hypervigilance. She learns to detect the father's micro-expressions, the way he closes the door, the heavier breathing, the distant look. She becomes an expert at predicting the next attack, the next punishment, the next humiliation. And this hypervigilance affects the nervous system for years, sometimes for life. In adult life, hypervigilance manifests as constant anxiety, difficulty relaxing, fear of making mistakes, excessive need for approval, extreme self-criticism. The body continues living on a battlefield that is already ended, but it doesn't know that. It is still scanning for danger that is no longer there. And there is also another very common wound that is rarely discussed: triangulation. And what is this? Well, the narcissistic father often manipulates the daughter against the mother. He might treat this daughter as the special one, the only person who understands him, who gets him. Meanwhile, he devalues the mother or portrays her as incompetent, as exaggerated, as too emotional, as crazy. And this creates a devastating internal conflict, because the daughter feels guilt for receiving better treatment than her mother. She witnesses the humiliations, the financial disrespect, the insults, the control, and as a child, she tries to assume the role of mediator, of protector, of counselor, roles that should never have been hers to carry. This role reversal is called parentification, and it robs the daughter of part of her childhood. At the same time, this girl feels anger toward her mother for not being able to defend herself, and then feels guilt for feeling that anger. It is an emotional knot that is difficult to untangle, but it is absolutely understandable when you see the impossible position she was placed in. So, what are the types of narcissistic fathers? Well, there is the grandiose narcissist, charismatic, expansive, socially seductive. In public, he is charming, the life of the party. At home, he is unpredictable, sometimes terrifying. And often he uses his daughter as a trophy to enhance his ego, whether through her beauty, her grades, her talents, or her exemplary behavior. He has no clear boundaries. This father might flirt with women openly, teaching his daughter that relationships are places of betrayal, that this is just how men are. As a result, the daughter learns to measure her value through achievements, through external validation, and she normalizes infidelity and emotional humiliation as just part of love. Another type is the vulnerable narcissist. He is the eternal victim, always complaining, always suffering, always playing the martyr, and the daughter grows up believing she needs to take care of him, needs to protect and console him. He makes her believe she is responsible for his emotions, for his happiness, an unbearable burden for a child. The result is that the daughter becomes a chronic people pleaser, carrying guilt that was never hers and nullifying her own needs to avoid hurting others, to avoid disappointing anyone. There is also the communal narcissist. What is this? Well, this is the father who is perfect for the world, for the outside world. He is the exemplary volunteer, the community leader, the admired man, right? But inside the house, he is the controller, the cold one, the cruel one. And this incongruence destroys the daughter's perception of reality, because she thinks, if everyone loves him, then the problem must be me. If he is so good out there, why is he different with me? As a result, chronic self-doubt develops, along with difficulty trusting her own feelings and a high propensity for relationships where manipulation is invisible, normalized. One of the most profound consequences of being a narcissistic father's daughter is the suppression of identity. The daughter has no space to discover who she is because her life revolves around avoiding her father's fury, seeking approval, avoiding conflict, and meeting his expectations. She becomes an expert at occupying others' emotional space and a stranger within herself. In adult life, this transforms into imposter syndrome, into difficulty making decisions, into fear of standing out, into a constant sensation of inadequacy, and into disconnection from her own desires. She knows what pleases others but has no idea what pleases her. So how do you get out of this? Well, healing isn't forgetting. Healing is rewriting. The emotional patterns formed through living with a narcissistic father function almost like emotional DNA. They're automatic, they're deep, and they were learned over years. They don't disappear overnight, but they can be transformed. The process involves radical acceptance, recognizing that what happened to you was real and was wrong. It also involves grief. Grief for the father you didn't have, grief for the stolen childhood, grief for the versions of yourself that had to die so a more wounded version could survive. Healing also involves emotional disengagement, stopping trying to change your father and stopping seeking validation from where it will never come. The next step is reconstructing your relationship model, because with therapeutic help, you can learn what relational safety actually is. You can learn that love isn't supposed to hurt like that boundaries don't push people away. Boundaries protect you. And then you can recover your identity, discover your opinions, your preferences, your desires. Discover who you are when you are not trying to survive. This healing is slow, but it is possible, and it is liberating. If you've made it this far, I want to tell you something very important. You are not the product of the father you had. Your wounds tell where you came from, but they don't tell where you are going. They don't define your essence. They don't determine your relationships, and they don't limit your future. You are learning, maybe for the first time, to love yourself without fear, to set boundaries without guilt, to exist without asking permission. And this is courage. This is emotional maturity. This is healing. You deserve to see yourself as you really are, whole, capable, and profoundly valuable. You always were. You always will be. Stay safe, traveler. I'll see you on our next journey.